I'm Yasmin Gagne.
I'm Josh Christensen.
And this is Most Innovative Companies Video Edition.
Yaz, are you tired of me talking about sports on the podcast yet?
Oh my God, yeah. Honestly, I was so glad to let you do this interview.
Honestly, yeah, this was just you deciding, Josh talks about sports. I gotta let him get it out of his system.
Yep, that's correct.
You need to catch up so I have someone to talk to these things about.
Find another friend. One more friend.
God, it's been so hard to make just one. Okay, we're talking about sports because I interviewed the vice president and GM of House of Highlights for this week's episode. We actually talked to him at the Fast Company Innovation Festival. We had a little booth on the floor there. Really nice setup, really cramped, really hot in there. But there is a pretty good chance that if you've seen a sports highlight on your Instagram feed, it came from House of Highlights. The brand started over 10 years ago as just one Instagram account posting the best highlights from across the world of sports. But since then, it's grown into a multi-platform media empire. After being acquired by Bleacher Report in 2016, House of Highlights has grown beyond highlights to original content, long-form franchises, and even a sports league of their own. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Yeah, the Creator League. We'll get to it. I talked to House of Highlights Vice President and GM Drew Muller about how they've built their brand. Here's that conversation. All right, Drew Muller, thanks for coming on Most Innovative Companies.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really excited to chop it up with you.
So I want to start from the very beginning. I think a lot of our listeners will probably know House of Highlights, at least in tangentially, if they're not a sports fan. It's really hard to miss on Instagram or YouTube. House of Highlights started as one Instagram account about 11 years ago, right?
Correct, yeah.
And now it's multi-platform, 100 million followers, billions of monthly views. How did that happen?
Yeah. It's a great question. I mean, I think the genesis, like you said, was started by a guy named Omar Raja in his college dorm room. And the idea was, I'm not seeing highlights or the highlights that I want on the platforms where I'm spending time. Seems like kind of table stakes now that you see the proliferation of highlights basically everywhere you look on social media. Yeah. But back then it really was a novel idea. And the Bleacher Report leadership at the time, including a man by the name of Doug Bernstein, who was the initial general manager of House of Highlights, led the acquisition of bringing in this Instagram account and bringing it into the Bleacher Report kind of TNT sports world and saying, this account is doing something interesting. It's speaking with young people. It's overperforming in ways that seem to not map to what typical sports companies are doing. Let's bring them in and let's figure it out from there. And it really is a credit to that group at the time that let House of Highlights incubate essentially as a startup within this larger company that is Bleacher Report and at the time Turner Sports. And the first year was really, hey, use sports rights, do this officially as opposed to maybe recording things on your TV screen. And from there, let's figure out if we can make this into a multi-platform media company that can stand on its own and be incremental to what Bleacher Report was already doing so well. I think that was like a really core focus from the early years, was to say, you know, we don't want to cannibalize the advertising base or the audience that Bleacher Report has, because then we're kind of beating ourselves. Yeah. So how do we make this differentiated and give fans a reason to want to follow both accounts, as opposed to saying, oh, well, now House of Highlights is doing this thing that I used to follow Bleacher Report for, I can, unfollow. And it really scaled from that kind of North Star insight. So it was one person that then went to a team of 3 to 5. And there was essentially a group of us that were already at Bleacher Report that were brought together to kind of form this early business that was House of Highlights. I came in an operations and strategy role. There were folks working on social and content and production and brand marketing. And Tiger, who's here, was heading up PR. And from there, it was taking small steps to say, let's dominate on Instagram. Let's figure out how we can be number one on Instagram before then taking a step into YouTube, before then taking a step into TikTok and so forth, which I know we'll talk about a bit later.
I want to talk a little bit about the acquisition because I think what's impressive to me about House of Highlights, and ultimately I think a lot of the Warner Brothers and the sports sort of multi-layered approach to sports coverage, is that the identity of House of Highlights seems to be intact. It doesn't feel like it was just absorbed into Bleacher Report. I think of the two as very much separate entities, despite them being
Glad to hear it. It means we're doing our job.
Yeah. How do you think about that? Like, using the resources of a big company that you have that has all of this access, but maintaining House of Highlights sort of independent vibe.
Yeah. It is a lot of what I spend my day focused on. That is, it kind of is an undercurrent no matter what we're working on or what meeting we're in. And I think it leads to a lot of, at times, hard or uncomfortable conversations to say, this is what our voice is and this is what our voice isn't, right? So oftentimes we'll have pitches from producers on our team that say, hey, this is a great idea and it maps to, a YouTube trend or a TikTok trend. Can we do it? And, the leadership team will oftentimes need to say, no, that's Bleacher Report's lane, or that's something they're already doing really well and that's not our right to win. So I would say a lot of it maps down to just a real steadfast commitment to voice and real clarity of who we are and who we're not. I think a lot of it is due to the organizational structure where House of Highlights is essentially able to maintain operational independence, strategy independence. We have our own go-to-market strategy. We have our own assets and content strategy and logos and identities and even fonts. And it seems like small things, but in the early days, that was the key difference, right? Like the very beginning, House of Highlights' logo was the same as the BR logo, the same font. It was just H/H instead of B/R.
Yeah.
And we were like, how do we make this feel different? Logo, font, color, voice, types of content. And over time, I think that's kind of codified in a way that feels very different in feed. And it's something that we review pretty rigorously. Like on a NBA night, for example, we're looking at, hey, here's how Bleacher Report covered this moment. Here's how House of Highlights covered this moment. Do these look too similar? Like, did we miss an opportunity to cover the same moment differently? And I think when we do that well, we're the best in the business at it. I think it's hard to find another sports media company that can kind of play both lanes. But it does take a day in and day out focus to balance the two, because to your point, we do share and eat from the same pool of sports rights and sometimes resources.
Yeah. And it's so opposite, I think, from what ESPN has tried to do very successfully to the point. But like ESPN is very much like, we're ESPN. If it's on ESPN, it's ESPN.
Totally.
Which I think has been very successful for them. So I guess from a competition standpoint, do you look at ESPN as competition, or are you just trying to do your own thing and not really worry about that? Like, there's enough pie to eat for everybody.
Totally. In terms of how we cover sports moments, I still believe that the accounts have different voices and cover sports moments in different ways that as a user, I would find it valuable to follow both accounts. Again, that's very much how our team is thinking about it, is in your Instagram feed, do you want to see both accounts? Sometimes that comes down to which sports we're able to cover just from a rights portfolio perspective. Like March Madness, for example, like ESPN isn't posting from the men's tournament because we have that exclusively, obviously, with our partner CBS. So there are certain sports rights where we do have exclusivity. There are sports rights where we maybe compete to be first to a moment. But to me, the value comes down to how we package and distribute that moment and the voice that we add to it. And that, to me, is always going to be our right to win. And that's an audience relationship and an expectation that we have to kind of stay really focused on. And I think the other big part is just from an original content and IP perspective, right? So there's the part of the business where we're focused on sifting through the internet and curating the best of the best. And then there's what new ideas do we want to bring to our platforms? And that for House of Highlights has always been creator-led. Yeah. Right? That the creator voices and the talent that you see in thumbnails and kind of driving the narrative are creators. I think ESPN is a lot more athlete-focused or reporter-focused in terms of people at desks and analysis. Yeah. And I think that comes down to what fans expect from a House of Highlights versus maybe a more traditional version of ESPN.
Yeah. Now, you talked a little bit about original content. That has been probably the biggest shift in what House of Highlights has done since it began. Yeah. As an aggregator, literally a House of Highlights. Yeah. Creating original content, particularly long-form content. Let's talk specifically about YouTube right now. What was I think it's part of what like YouTube rewards now is longer content, which makes sense. Longer content, they can put in more ad breaks. If you're not a premium subscriber, you can see 50, 60 unskippable ads over there. And that's ultimately how you monetize overall. But in developing long form content, what were those conversations about? Because I think going from an Instagram account to something that we're now going to do hour-long programming is a huge jump.
Totally. So I would say in the mid to late 2010s, a lot of what we were seeing when we were programming highlights was that the interactions in the comment section or the general discourse for fans that were in the teens and 20s were around creators, right? So it wasn't just about the highlight. It was maybe how their favorite creator was reacting to that highlight. And again, now in 2025, it might seem like obvious, but back then it really was more of a niche movement that the traditional players didn't see happening. So unless you had like a really clear vantage point into how people in their teens and 20s were consuming sports, you really wouldn't have had that insight. So when we first started to make original content, it was almost out of necessity creator-led, because we were a small, scrappy team, and in many instances, we couldn't afford to pay huge athletes. There were creators that were starting to blow up on Instagram and YouTube, but were nowhere near the scale we're talking about today. So we were able to form really big partnerships with creators that are now huge and kind of household names. Supreme Dreams, Mark Phillips being one of those, and his group RDC. One of the big original series that we developed first was called the Supreme Dreams Show. So it was essentially working with him to both make sports comedy reactions and sketches, as well as longer form kind of episodic sketch-based comedy. And all of it tied back to sports, youth culture, and kind of putting an entertaining lens on what it is to be a sports fan or to experience sports with your friends in a group chat and things like that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the guiding principle was always, how do we create what we curate, right? So like we're curating at all times, and as a curator, you're hoping to find something in your feed. So how do we reverse engineer that a little bit and say, like, what do we hope to find when we refresh our feed and hope to curate? And using that as kind of a guiding principle has led to some really fascinating creative journeys that we've been on over the years. But I think the most value that we've gotten from both building like habitual long form viewership is always making sure that an hour-long video or 2-hour-long video has a clear path to short form. Because again, at the end of the day, we have massive amounts of short form expertise and scale, and people are expecting that from us. So something that can only exist as long form isn't valuable to us, and something that is only short form necessarily isn't always valuable to us either. So that you're going to see that come across in the beats of the show and the creative and how we approach it.
So what does that mean for you in terms of like indexing on different platforms? I think like there's always a habit of like, what is oversaturation versus undersaturation, particularly on TikTok and the vertical video platforms? How do you think about that?
So YouTube, I would say, is a mix between, let's call it like our sports IP and rights. So from a long form perspective, you're going to see full game recaps for, the folks that maybe aren't in the cable bundle and aren't watching 2 to 3 hour games. They typically will come to House of Highlights YouTube for a 10 to 15 minute recap of that game and love that format for them. You'll also then see our long form originals that complement that from a House of Highlights YouTube perspective. Shorts will kind of bleed across all of those. So you'll see the best sports highlights, you'll see viral, youth culture and user generated content. You'll also see our originals. I think as you go from that spectrum to Instagram, that is what I would call the most selective in terms of lowest volume for us related to, in comparison to YouTube and TikTok. And the idea is that, just based on how discovery on that platform has worked for the last couple of years, it's definitely an area where you can inundate users. I think on TikTok, based on how the For You page operates, right, like that's where the app opens to. A lot of times you can publish a lot more and those videos will find their homes without feeling like you are taking up all of someone's feed. Whereas on Instagram, if someone follows House of Highlights and we're publishing 100 times a day, it will feel like that in your feed. And that balance has been really important over the years, is trying to keep Instagram as the cream of the crop and kind of the top most competitive of what you need to see and putting a really hard criteria through that. And then TikTok maybe opening that aperture and saying, can we hit more passion points that young people have on TikTok, because we know it'll find its home in a way that's a little bit different than Instagram.
I hate Instagram for that reason.
Yeah.
Because it feels so punitive all the time in terms of like the content you put out there.
The platform is also just going through a weird growth phase itself, where I think they're trying to emulate certain parts of what they've seen success with, that TikTok has had success with, certain parts of what YouTube has had success with, but while still staying true to what they've kind of become in the creator ecosystem. But from a scaled publisher perspective, it makes it very hard to predict success on an ongoing basis, because, again, just speaking through our lens, oftentimes we'll go into our dashboard and just looking at the amount of our scale that is coming from non-followers is unbelievable. And that's changed so materially over the last couple of years because of how discovery is now pushing on Instagram. So you both have to think through the lens where you don't want to abandon your, 50 plus million followers who love House of Highlights for a certain reason, but then you also have to acknowledge many of our most viral videos, you'll go into the back end and see 80% of these were non-followers. So it's awesome for growth, but it's maybe reaching a new audience for a different reason. And you almost have to be a little bit predictive of where you think the discovery might bring you to hit on those topics.
How do you think about like conversion in terms of getting those people onto your other platforms where you can, to be, blunt, monetize them in a better way? How do you think about that?
So I think some of it comes down to a smart short form strategy, right? Like we talked about, we might, one of our hit series, Fan vs. Hater, is a hour-long, essentially debate style show where
you're playing off of Jubilee.
Exactly.
It's a really fun sports
who we
thing.
Love. Yeah, exactly.
Far less toxic than Jubilee.
And that's the point, right? Is to say, hey, not all of debate needs to be super toxic. It can still be anchored in sports and fun. And then, when those end, everyone leaves the room and daps and hugs each other, and
what was
everyone's
your most
good.
recent one? Was like an Eagles fan. Well, Eagles fans can get a little more toxic,
we actually we published a 1 Red Sox fan versus 10 Yankees fans. So
I need to watch that.
As a New England guy, that'll scratch an itch.
I gotta say, I completely tuned out of baseball for like the longest time because it was just slow. It was boring. It was not for me. Only this year have I gotten back into baseball, and it's just because of Roman Anthony on the Red Sox. So I'm there. I need to watch that video.
Totally. But again, like that series, which is there's a few things there, right? So that series, our focus for that is trying to generate long form viewership and kind of position House of Highlights as a future of sports TV, right? As YouTube is increasingly being positioned as the future of TV, and the lion's share of where young people are spending, time watching on their living room devices is on YouTube. We're trying to redefine like how people think about what a TV show is. And that is our 2-hour long programming on our YouTube channel. But to your point, how do we make sure that those that we're not reaching or that aren't already in that net of YouTube still know that this content is happening, maybe develop fandom of that content? And I think that comes down to a tight short form strategy. Knowing what's going to work for our Instagram audience in terms of those cut downs versus our TikTok audience, and ways that we can make people fans of it before they've even seen the long form, I think is a really unique value proposition of that like short to long form strategy. So we really think about, short form clipping in ways that can bring in new audience that maybe isn't already there watching it on YouTube. So either team specific, player specific, topic specific, areas that we know we're maybe under indexed in terms of our existing YouTube subscriber base. How do we hit those short form pockets on a TikTok where we know it'll find an Eagles fan that maybe historically hasn't subscribed to House of Highlights YouTube channel because we're not doing Eagles content historically. So trying to have the platforms play with each other a bit.
Creator deals. You talked about creator-led content. It was really out of necessity to begin with. Creator economy and the profiles of these people that you're working with. I think Kai Cenat is part of your.
He's participated in Creator League in the past.
In your Creator League in the past. He blew up insanely in the past few years. How has your deal structure with these creators changed? Because at the beginning, I imagine it's very mutually beneficial.
Totally.
These people are now their own media companies. They're driving just huge traffic. Are you still looking for who's that next up and coming person who we can get into our ecosystem and it's mutually beneficial versus let's bring in a Kai Cenat, let's bring in, one of the biggest Twitch streamers that's out there right now. How are you thinking about deal structure with creators?
So what we like to say is where House of Highlights specializes is if you're looking at a creator's kind of growth chart, we want to be like right here. So like right as we see the key signs where they're starting to take off, but before they get to the point where they're a household name and they're the cream of the crop. Not to say we don't still want to work with them at that point, but typically that's when they're getting, overpaid by some of the legacy companies or some of the leagues that are a little bit behind, and then say we need to do whatever we can to have Mr. Beast in our commercial spot, right? So I think
we're not going to see Mr. Beast like dunking on people.
We may, right? Because I think the special part of House of Highlights' role in the creator economy is that, again, we've been invested in it for so long. We've built a lot of the formats that have now been replicated by many of the big leagues and some of the big media companies, that a lot of the big name creators know, like we have incredible relationships with them. They know we've been invested in the space for a while. So there's more of a trust dynamic when we go into a partnership where they know they're not just showing up for an appearance fee or to check a box. Like we're really trying to build special content together and special franchises and IP that can scale. And I think they also genuinely see the value of having their platform amplified on a national platform like House of Highlights. So always having, that part very much at the forefront of the value that we're able to bring to creators, I think is important. And then from a structure standpoint, like you said, it went from maybe more standard appearance fee type structures into, how can we get more creative with building IP together? How can we build, whether it's revenue share or e-commerce or, co-sales arrangements, like we very much like you said, like a lot of these creators now have business infrastructures or they themselves are businesses. So a lot of the bigger conversations are approached in that way. And I think it's allowed us to still work with many of the biggest names in the space, but not necessarily always need to overpay, for lack of a better way to say it. Not to say we don't still pay very aggressively, but I think we have the relationships that allow us to get a little bit more creative with how we structure those deals.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating to me how professionalized, to use a fake word, the creator economy has become. We had Andrew Yaffe on the podcast not too long ago, who's awesome, and what he's doing with Dude Perfect is really cool. But the idea of someone coming from the NBA proper, where he was, to run a creator studio is just, it's a trend that we're seeing more and more. Like you see, especially in the comedy space, companies like Smosh or Dropout, those companies becoming really studio spaces. So now this is what you're contending with. You're a media company who's now trying to work now with other media companies, not entertainers necessarily.
As House of Highlights, for the longest time, we focused on how do we make the long, linear live broadcast of sports digestible for young people. And that was short clips, packaging in a fun, relatable voice, getting it out super quick and putting it everywhere that they wanted to see content, and leaning really into that, really far into that. And, around 21, 22, we were like, we're doing this incredibly well. We've kind of defined a category that is now sports highlights and sports clipping.
I mean, I think everyone under 20 doesn't actually watch games. They just watch highlights afterwards. Like my nephew does not actually watch sports, but he consumes highlights incessantly.
And that's become the lion's share of consumption of many of these leagues. And I think, again, I like to think that House of Highlights played a small part in that. But what I would say is that we always have a clear eye and perspective on the reality that at the end of the day, that is still someone else's content. Like we are renting league rights, and our league partners are immensely valuable. Like we want to stay in business with them for the long term, but we also know that they're running businesses, and even a 10-year deal, which can seem like an eternity, eventually those end. And sometimes leagues can move in and out. So for House of Highlights as a discrete business and trying to focus on how we maximize our value, we're sitting there and saying, how much of our destiny do we control? And that was kind of the genesis of this, is to say, if we wanted to build our own sports league and we wanted to make our own property where we could clip everything we wanted to and build it from the ground up for young fans and based on where we see consumption going, what would that look like? And it was, well, we're going to have creators compete instead of athletes, and we're going to distribute it on all of the big platforms where, 18, 19, 20-year-olds are spending their time. And we're going to make the formats fun and action dense, and we're going to have the play-by-play guys be huge creators and all down the line. But the core focus was to say, as you said, under 34 sports fans are watching less and less live cable sports events.
Yeah.
Can we build an appointment viewing experience for that fandom? And I think from an advertising perspective, obviously that is super valuable, and it's increasingly hard to reach that audience at scale. So
especially for appointment viewing.
Exactly.
I mean, that's such a hurdle. I guess we're sort of on the other side of the curve of like the cord cutter getting away from linear TV. Maybe we're going a little bit back to that. I mean, you see Netflix has huge deals with live programming, with Raw, with WWE Raw. YouTube just streamed the Chargers-Chiefs game last year. So it seems like we're on the other side of that curve still. You're hyper-focused on 34 and below.
Exactly.
They don't watch linear TV. Maybe they're not a monolith. Maybe I'm stereotyping, but it seems like that's such a huge challenge.
Yeah, I think that audience in the linear ecosystem has been shrinking.
Yeah.
And I think the early misnomer was that either they don't want to watch long form content or that it's harder to get them in the same place at the same time.
Yeah.
And I think what we've seen, particularly in the age of massive streamers that are driving live concurrent audiences that, blow your mind, is that people will still show up. People just want to access content in the places where they like to spend their time, in frictionless environments and with relatable voices, and typically in environments where they have the ability to have a community and a two-way conversation, either through chat or through emojis and whatever it is. And again, I think for advertisers that are desperately trying to reach this audience to say like, hey, we need to get this messaging out on a Friday night at 7, and I want to reach 50, 100,000 people under 34 in a live environment, that is increasingly hard to do. And again, just for Creator League, like that was our first North Star, is like, can we build a live format that is compelling enough to bring those types of numbers in at the same time, and marry all of these kind of key sensibilities that we know exist in the live consumption space. And the early results were just far exceeded our expectations, I would say. And we kind of went from this model where we were doing these huge moments in time a few times a year, but then would bring in a ton of audience, then have people say, well, what happened? Like, when's the next one? Like, how do we become a part of this league, or what are the narratives? What can I latch onto? To now where we're, mid-season on a formal league structure for Creator League of, 5 events, huge team captains that drafted from a pool of creators, $500,000 on the line, and all of those kind of key tenets that build fandom and build a reason to have people talk between events. And again, for Creator League, it's now, after every event, we're looking at how many under 34 people did we have in the live window? How long did they spend watching each live stream? How much did they complete? When did they drop off?
Yeah.
And then from a short form perspective, how did our highlights of Creator League compare to maybe how we cover some of the other sports leagues? And I think that's one of the things that would blow people's mind is, like, recently we had a flag football event last month that did 100 million views on House of Highlights and Creator League platforms, which, you can compare that to, some of the things you would think of as huge moments on House of Highlights, be it NBA All-Star or MLB World Series, and it's like...
That many people are not watching NBA All-Star.
But it's an incredible highlights moment that gets, tons of clips because you have all the biggest names.
Sure, mostly just the Fergie the national anthem. It's the only All-Star game that I'll watch repeatedly.
It's still great. It's still out there. But yeah, again, like that is... We're holding ourselves to that mark to say, a lot of times people are like, oh, it's a new niche sports league, but we're putting up numbers that rival a lot of the biggest sports leagues in the world. And it's exciting for us because, again, it's a homegrown sports property where we control all of the parameters. So it gets really fun with creative ideas and competitive formats.
Yeah. What creator surprised you the most with how athletic they are?
Every event, I would say yes. Most recent, that flag football event, Rakai, who's up-and-coming creator who's in the Clover House Kai AMP world.
Yeah.
He had one of the most viral highlights we've ever had on House of Highlights. He had a full field rushing touchdown that I think has driven like 30 million views across just our platforms and got picked up by a bunch of streamers. But some of the moves that he made were pro level moves. And you saw, I think Lamar Jackson liked the video, Quavo was in the comment section, Drake liked the video. So you saw it really transcend outside of just kind of this niche event that happened. I'll send you the clip after this. It is super impressive because it's again, it's flag football. So to scramble as a quarterback and make it through the full field was actually absurd. And it was at the end of the game too. So it was a winning moment for him.
Got Winter Olympics coming up. We've got FIFA World Cup. Any big plans for those events, especially like FIFA World Cup's going to be in the US? It's going to be a huge thing. How are you thinking about those sort of big tentpole events?
So I think our approach for events like that where we're not, in the US necessarily a rights holder is to figure out how we bring kind of our voice and our approach to working with creators and youth culture to the celebration of those moments. So oftentimes we'll, populate different types of content series in and around the footprint that these events are happening. And other times we're looking for, the user-generated content off the field or off the court where many of these incredible athletes are spending time with one another in a city for several days or several weeks, and we're able to find amazing moments that they share together, maybe post on their personal channels.
Yeah.
So a lot of it is through the lens of how we amplify the moments that would matter to our audience, but do it in ways that are different than maybe NBC is doing domestically in the US for the Summer Olympics, for example. And then, for Winter Olympics, which is coming up just in a couple months, right? Like we have international rights to the Winter Olympic Games. So being such a huge distributed brand and global, we have tens of millions of followers that are not based in the US. So we still do very large commercial partnerships with our international team. And, for the last Summer Olympics, we did a deal with Samsung that was a huge deal that was focused specifically on international markets. So folks in the US didn't see any of our highlights coverage for the Summer Olympics because it was geo-targeted to just those markets. It'll be similar for Winter Olympics. It'll be similar for Summer Olympics where, again, outside of or within the US, it might not feel like House of Highlights is covering the events from a highlights perspective. But for folks not in the US, it'll be like, oh, wow, this is like the NBA or the MLB or NHL experience on House of Highlights, but for the Summer Olympics.
Outside of that, what are you most excited about that's coming up for House of Highlights?
So we've got 3 events left in our Creator League season. So we've got a basketball knockout, 5-on-5, and then a championship series, and that'll carry us through the end of November. And just based on the numbers that we're seeing, we're very, very excited about what the championship could look like, and just seeing the culmination of a team winning $500,000, and also seeing how the captains maybe handle that money and how much they share versus how much they keep themselves should lead to some fun storylines. And then honestly, the growth of our fan versus hater series and where that overarching brand can go in terms of debate style content for a younger audience. So a lot of that comes down to our focus on YouTube and again, how we're building the future of sports TV and making House of Highlights, a broadcast channel, right? So when someone is going to YouTube, how do we make House of Highlights one of the few places that they go and say, this is where I'm going to watch my sports content, and I'm going to lean back and I'm going to spend hours watching. So again, those are the areas that I'm particularly excited, in addition to, of course, the upcoming NBA season, the upcoming fall sports season, and all of the areas that House of Highlights is trying to capture the best of what's going on in the internet.
Drew, thanks so much for coming on the show.
I really appreciate you having me on. This was awesome.